edition of the Farmers Supply Association Agriculture Report. Well, March is here, and that wet weather pattern that we've been talking about, I guess, since like September, so 6 or 7 months now. It continued and even escalated in February. Depending on where you were at, probably had somewhere around 12 inches of rain in February, and it rained on 18 out of the 28 days. You know, before I've been talking about maybe 12, 13 days a month. Well, it went up to 18 in February. So, you know, on my last program, I said, well, we've been getting a lot of rain, but nothing real heavy. We hadn't had any river flooding. Well, that changed just a couple of days after I taped that report. And obviously, all the rivers have been out. Some of them still out. So we've got quite a bit of river and ditch flooding and things like that going on as well. So adding to the problem. So far, March has been a little bit better. And we're taping on the 8th. We've had rain, I think, on 3 or 4 out of the 8 days so far, but it's been pretty light so far. Probably hadn't added up to a 10th or so, and we're supposed to get some heavier rain maybe over the next couple of days. We'll see, but maybe we're changing that pattern and at least getting into some lighter rain, and maybe things will change here pretty quick. Field work's been very limited. Earlier this week there was some tillage on pretty much just the lighter soils, you know, that drain real quickly, so we've had a little bit of tillage on them. Had some burn down applications of herbicides go out, but even those have been limited. You know, the first 7 days of March been probably record cold for that time of the year for that first week of March, so that has really hampered even the burn down herbicide application. So limited tillage, a little bit of burn down, so things have been really slow so far. Today I want to start talking about some issues with rice. You know, rice planting. You know, we're hearing some stories on the news. You know, they're always looking for some good stories, and you know, I've been talking about concerns about the rice not getting planted and stuff like that. And you know, they started that in February. Well, you know, we got a long time to go yet. We're just now in early March, and we got a long time to go to get this rice planted. We all know that this soil moisture situation can change quickly. And we've got the fields rutted up, some heavy soils rutted up. They're going to take a while to dry up in places where the water's backed out and things like that. But we all know when that pattern changes, it gets hot, and we can start getting some windy days and hot days. Well, it can dry out pretty quickly. So, you know, no reason whatsoever to panic at this point, in my opinion. As I get into rice planting, one of the big key points that I always want to talk about more than anything is rice weed control. This month, that's what I want to focus on. I want to talk mainly about overlapping residual herbicides. And, you know, most people are doing that these days. There's still a few guys out there that really haven't adapted this practice yet. And I just think it's so critical to do this if you want a successful weed control program. I think pretty much everybody knows what overlapping residuals mean, but just want to briefly define that. That just means that, you know, just as soon as you plant before that first rainfall, you want to get a residual herbicide out there. Before it runs out, you want to get another residual herbicide out there and get it activated. And sometimes you might even go to a third one. Pretty much everybody that overlaps residuals is going to do at least 2. And again, depending on how long that pre-flood season goes, there may be a third application as well. So it's just keeping a residual herbicide out there, keeping it active. Why do we do this? Well, there's several reasons, several benefits to overlapping residuals. One, it's just easier to control a weed if it never emerges. You know, we've got so many issues with post-emergence weed control these days. It seems like they just increase all the time. First and foremost, resistance issues with our post-emergence herbicides. There's been, you know, at least a couple of fields I know in Poinsett County where samples have been set off over the past few years, and the only thing left that provides any control are the residual herbicides Bolero and Prowl. Pretty much every other herbicide, or every other herbicide family at least, has resistance to it. So that some of those guys are left pretty much with just Bolero and Prowl as their options right now. So we just don't, we've got so many resistance issues, we just need to keep them from ever coming up. Application issues, you know, whether we're trying to get timely applications of our herbicides, you know, and nearby crops that we want to avoid drift on, those kind of things, makes it hard to apply those post herbicides. And generally it's going to be quite a bit more economical. Obviously, if you don't get your residual herbicides activated and they don't work at all, then it's not going to be as economical. But if you get them activated and working, it's going to be a more economical weed control program. I want to talk about, really talking about mainly like 4 herbicides in these residual herbicide category. First 2 are pre-emerge herbicides, which means you can apply them immediately after planting. Just as soon as you get the drill out of the field or get the field covered, if you're broadcasting the seed, then you can apply these herbicides. Those are Command and Facet. There's a little bit of Command resistance out there. It's not widespread yet. We don't want to just rely strictly on Command, I think, with our residuals, because there is a little resistance showing up out there. So we want to avoid that. Command is a broad spectrum residual herbicide, controls most types of grasses or has activity on most types of grasses. The other one is Facet. You hear about Facet resistance, but that's mostly to the post-emerge applications of Facet. The pre's work still well. The only real drawback, or one or two drawbacks, it's a 0 on Sprangle-Top. So if you got Sprangle-Top, don't rely on Facet. It does have good black seed weed control, like coffee bean, indigo, and morning glory. So that's a real plus with it. So Facet's a good option in those pre categories. A lot of people are going to think about New Path. I'm not going to mention much about New Path. Of course, that's for clearfield rice. Some people use it as a pre, and some people will just wait and make sequential post applications, but it does have pre-emerge activity. The other category is the delayed pre-herbicides. Those are Prowl and Bolero. That means with delayed pre, it means you need to let the rice seed imbibe its water for germination, so it doesn't absorb its herbicide. It's already absorbed its water for germination, and it shouldn't absorb the herbicide, and you shouldn't have any kind of injury from these. These are Prowl and Bolero, and I see some people get by with pre-applications of Prowl. I don't recommend it. I've seen people get by, and I've seen people have weak stands because of putting Prowl out too early. So really want to avoid that, in my opinion. Prowl has good activity on most grass species, and also going to give you some pigweed control as well. Again, the other one, Bolero. Bolero has pretty broad spectrum grass control. It's pretty weak on broadleaf signal grass, so that's one thing I don't like about it, is that the weakness on broadleaf signal grass. Has good aquatic control and good annual sedge control. So those are your residual herbicides. There are also some premixes out there. Rice 1, that's Command and Prowl. Obey, that's Facet and Command. Those are some good premixes if you want to use those. As far as some programs, I like going either Command right after planting or Command plus Facet. And then I like my overlap to be something like maybe a Prowl Bolero, or maybe like a Facet Bolero or a Facet Prowl. And some people may spike some more, put another little shot of Command out there. So those are some of the programs you can use. That's for the annual grasses. Don't overlook your sedges and broadleafs. Got two options there. Sharpen is a very good material that we always think of it as a post, but it's a very good pre-material as well. And we think about it more for post for pigweeds and things like that, but we need to be thinking about it as a pre, and really need to get that rate up there preferably about 3 ounces or so. You can mix that with your Command. It's going to give you some good annual sedge activity, and most of our annual sedge is getting resistant to certain herbicides now, the ALS herbicides, so I'd really like getting that annual sedge in a pre-emerge fashion if we can. Sharpen also has some good pigweed activity if they're not PPO resistant, also some other broadleaves. So, be thinking about Sharpen not just as a post-emerge, but be thinking about it as a pre-emerge material. Again, we need to get that rate up there, 2 to 3, preferably 3 ounces, and you can mix that with Command again. Another one that we often overlook is League. League has good activity on yellow nut sedge, also indigo and coffee bean. League is an ALS herbicide, so a lot of our annual sedge, or some of our annual sedge, is going to be resistant to League. We can get some suppression of ALS resistant annual sedge with League, but again, you may have some weakness there, some sporadic control on some of the annual sedge, but again, good activity on indigo, coffee bean, and activity on yellow nut sedge as well. So be thinking about League. If you put that, you can mix that with some Bolero, and you're really going to pick up that annual sedge as well. So, don't forget about Sharpen and League and broadleaf and sedge control in these early applications. So hopefully by the time I do my April report, things are going to be happening in the field. I'm ready to get in the field, and hopefully we can tape our next program in the field and move on from there. So until next time, this has been Randy Klepechka with your Farmer Supply Association Agriculture Report for the month of March.